Well, good afternoon, everyone, and or Prynhawn da I chi, which is Welsh for good afternoon, everyone. Or if you're in the East Coast of the United States, I would say bore da I chi, which is Welsh to our American friends. My name is Ty Francis, and I'm the Chief Advisory Officer at LRN. And welcome to our first Unpacking the SCCE European Compliance and Ethics Institute. So today we're going to discuss highlights from the conference, chat about some of our takeaways and some next steps that we want to see in compliance. This is actually our third unpacking of the SCCE conference webinar, but our first in Europe, as it's been the first in-person one since the CV. I'm not going to say the actual words because I don't want to jinx anything. So it's actually been an exciting time for us at LRN. With our recent acquisition of the Thomson Reuters compliance learning business. And it's seen our customer base multiply all over the world, especially in APAC, the Middle East, and particularly in Europe. So it was particularly great to have been with friends, colleagues, and compliance professionals in Amsterdam last month. We've just been in Paris a few days before with my CEO, Amy Hannon, to showcase our LRN Catalyst Reveal data and analytics solution. So our trip to Amsterdam and seeing so many customers in person in another vibrant European city was a welcome return to normality. So I have some good news and some bad news for today. So first, the good news is that joining me today, I have a superb panel of experts and thought leaders. So we have Sofia Mansouri. And Sofia is the Regional Compliance Manager at Schneider Electric, also known as the Compliance Lady, where you can also find her at www.thecompliancelady.com/blog. I have Mary Shirley, who's Head of Culture of Integrity and Compliance Education at Fresenius Medical Care, but also the co-host of the wonderful Great Women in Compliance podcast, which she co-hosts with Lisa Fine. And you can find that at www.corporatecomplianceinsights.com/Great Women in Compliance. And last but not least, the ubiquitous Jonathan Armstrong, partner at Cordery Compliance, co-chair of the New York State Bar Association's Rapid Response Committee, let me get that right, and
well done.
No doubt, of managing risk, technology, and communications. And you can find Jonathan at any off-license and after-hours nightclub /shelter. So the bad news is that we only have a little under an hour with these fine people to have this conversation. So I'll jump straight in. So the 11th annual SCCE European Compliance and Ethics Institute took place in Amsterdam just under 2 weeks ago. We saw 200 E&C professionals in person, and I think around 50 sessions. And while it explored a kind of wide range of pressing issues from anti-corruption, ESG to AI automation and predictive control, today what we want to talk about is what stood out for us. What compliance and ethics topics do we anticipate seeing at a conference next year? So when we talk about what were the top compliance issues discussed, we're talking about at the sessions and the conference itself. We want to talk about what we talked about behind the conference sessions, at the bars, at the general sessions, at whatever liquor store Jonathan was holding out at. And if we have some time, I'm sorry, I know it sounds like I pick on Jonathan, which I do. If we have time, what kind of emerging what emerging ethics to compliance trends should we be looking out to in the future? Before I start, I just want to say that we do have a chat function on here, which we can take some Q&A questions from anyone. We are going to leave about 10 minutes towards the end. So if you want to save your question, that'll be great. If you have something pressing that Jonathan, Mary, or Sophia is talking about, then please jump in. But also, I just want to highlight that, I do want to give a shout out to Adam Turtletub, Jerry Zack, Becky Smith, and the SCCE team for what was a great event. It was great to be back in person, as I said before, and and for their hard work and support over that 3 days. Now it's easy for us to give this post-event webinar, but without their efforts, we wouldn't be unpacking anything at all. So to jump straight into it, and I gave you a very, very brief introduction, which didn't satisfy any purpose whatsoever, other than giving you a headline. So Mary Shirley, let's start with you. If you can tell us a little about yourself, what you're currently doing, and then if you can spend a couple of minutes talking about, what stood out for you at the conference and what really, what were your highlights?
Sure. Thanks very much to Ty and the whole LRN team for having us today. We're so thrilled to be here and have this opportunity. In addition to the items that Ty mentioned, I'm also working on my second book at the moment, which is going to be on leveling up compliance programs. Will be released as an ebook initially this year, and then later as a hard copy, which I'm intending to launch in a co-launch party with Matt Silverman, who's also releasing a book at a similar time. Look out for us at the SCCE ECEI in October, which is kind of like the big mama conference of the event that we're talking about today. One of the things that I noticed on the agenda for the conference in Amsterdam is that there was quite a bit there with regards to artificial intelligence, machine learning, and greenwashing, in particular on the ESG front. I think we knew that there was probably going to be some presence of ESG, but I was interested to note the greenwashing aspect, which Jonathan and I covered in our session. On the AI front, that's something that I haven't spent a lot of time looking at, and so it was a great learning opportunity. The Artificial Intelligence Act in Europe is fairly imminent, although ChatGPT may have thrown a spanner, as we'd say in New Zealand, or wrench if you're American, into the works. And so compliance officers, in my opinion, need to be thinking about artificial intelligence policies and other controls now. So I see this as being akin to social media, in that even if you yourself decide that you do not wish to partake in any of the glories of artificial intelligence and the types of tools associated with it, there is no getting away from it in our role as compliance officers. And so much like we drew up social media policies when it became clear that social media was here to stay, so too with artificial intelligence. And you'll be wanting to think about things such as how to regulate and account for potential biases, false information that's included. Interestingly, during the conference, the speakers at one session talked about how ChatGPT has a bias towards men. So as co-host of the Great Women in Compliance podcast, not loving the bias there, obviously, and just as a person, not loving that bias. So we really need to be on the front foot here because, for example, one of my family members in New York, working for a large financial services firm, his firm has already announced that they are going to be integrating ChatGPT. And so there's no waiting around for this. And there are some interesting implications, one of which I learned from Jonathan Armstrong's client alert last night that I was casually reading in my spare time. Italy has banned ChatGPT. So when we think about holistically across our organizations, how we're going to be deploying and regulating for these types of tools, we've also got to be conscious of the fact, where are we even allowed to be using these tools? And remember, this is a fast-moving, fast-changing area. So you need to consider that what you put in place now needs to be dynamic and a living part of your program that is flexible and ready for change as the artificial intelligence space evolves.
Yeah, jumping in there, actually, Mary, what I wanted to ask you, based on what you just said, years ago, we had all the social media policies telling us what we could do, how we could do it. And then, what seemed like a decade later, the, SEC came out with Reg FD, talking about how we should be, disseminating information in a very public, non quality kind of private way. But that took a long time. And, I joined Twitter, for example, I think in 2007. So that's, 16 years ago. I still don't see companies managing their social media or having their social media policies in a way that we do with FCPA or anti-harassment or, ABC. How do you think that's going to catch up with AI and, you know, all that kind of, you know, ethics in artificial intelligence policies. I mean, are we going to see that in 2030? Or do you think companies are going to be, you know, forced to come up to speed with that? Because I don't know. There's still a lot of chat about what it is rather than what we should be doing. And I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great point, and it's one that I hadn't noticed until very recently when a friend of mine who works in consultancy asked me if I knew of any good social media policies, because she'd been Googling and she wasn't seeing good examples. And I thought, what do you mean? Like, you know, we've been working on this for years now. And I realized that she had a point. Not all of the social media policies are covering some of the nuances. So they might talk about certain things like don't talk about the organization in a way that would, you know, put us into disrepute kind of thing. But then they've totally omitted to cover areas such as what it says about an employee who maybe clicks like on a post. You know, do you want to be regulating for someone that's essentially showing their opinion on what they think, not necessarily by the active words that they use, but by simply hitting like to support a particular post? Do we care if someone in our organization hits like on a racist post? I would say yes. Have you regulated for that in your social media policy? So I think the parallels will also apply to artificial intelligence, and where we need to be paying attention to be on the front foot with this is not only starting now, but involving experts when we need to, and really paying attention to what others are doing. Use benchmarking information, use Google if you have to, pay for a consultant who is a specialist in this space to adequately do it. You know, there is no shame in saying, I've made this rough first draft, but I am not an artificial intelligence expert, and getting the help where you need it. Compliance programs, as we know, need to be proportionate. And we also need to be conscious of the fact that we are, for many people, a cost center, but that doesn't mean spending our money wisely when we really need it. And I think this is clearly going to be a high exposure risk area for us moving forward.
Well, great. And, you know, we had a quick question come up in the chat actually about, you know, what about the regulators who are prohibiting, so that, you know, rather than looking to regulate it or, you know, kind of filter it, what about those regulators who are prohibiting it off the bat? I mean, you know, is that the right way? Is that what we should be doing?
I'd got a couple of thoughts on that, if that's okay.
Yes.
And if we're allowed to give shameless plugs, thanks, Mary, for the shameless plug for our alert on the ChatGPT ban last night. And we've got a new film on our YouTube channel at bit.ly/Cordery TV. You can find Cordery Compliance on YouTube. I'm going to get my sword down in a minute for a more effective slash, which is looking at these type of issues. And the client alert last night had sort of 10 top tips on where you can start if you're looking at AI from scratch. The interesting thing, I think, about Friday's ban, for those of you who don't know, the Italian Data Protection Authority banned or suspended ChatGPT, is it's sort of not a ban about accessing ChatGPT in Italy. It's sort of a worldwide ban, possibly, on any query that asks about Italian citizens. So I asked about Silvio Berlusconi's marriages today. ChatGPT is still serving results, but it seems possibly in breach of the order that was made on Friday. So where does that put us as corporations when we're using tools like that? And the other thing I'd say quickly is the answer to how to create a AI policy is not to ask ChatGPT for one. And I say that slightly comically, but I know that some people have been saying to ChatGPT, who is liable if something is wrong? And they've been getting crazy answers, obviously, with them saying, ChatGPT says, well, it's not me. You know, who is liable for copyright infringement if ChatGPT infringes copyright? And ChatGPT says, well, it ain't me. Well, you know, we can all say that we're not going to be liable for stuff, but that's not necessarily true. And to save time, our film out today goes into some of that with Professor Eric Sinrod, who's a US tech law expert, and we chat through some of these issues. But I think it is challenging if you're a new to compliance, and I do have a slight issue with one of the panels at the conference where they said, oh, AI is unregulated and regulation is coming. Well, honestly, that's poppycock. We've had about 180 million euros of AI related fines in the EU alone last year. Regulation ain't coming, it's here. No point in looking down the road for the truck because it's just run you over. You have to act now. You can't wait for the new EU Act or new legislation in your country. Regulatory regimes here already.
That's fascinating. Somebody talking about the social media policy thing, and Mary brought up, you know, is what is a good example of a social media policy? What should we be doing? Courtney Nordrum, who has also been on one of our post SCCE conference panels, does a great panel at the larger Chicago events about social media, how to use it. And this is not how to construct a tweet. This is really the legal implications with the national labor, laws on what you should be doing, what the ramifications are. And the question you asked, Mary, about should we be regulating our stakeholders, our employees about liking or sharing tweets? Yes or no? But she covers that. So I'm hoping that in not too distant future we'll have the same kind of panels about how do we design AI policies, and how do we kind of prepare for ChatGPT. So Mary, outside of the kind of the greenwashing element in the AI issue, was there anything else that stood out for you this year that you thought, okay, this is something I want to walk away with and say that was a good addition to this year's conference that may not have been there last year?
Yeah, I would stick with that. For me, at least personally, it would be the AI implications and how we really need to be thinking about these now and really thoughtfully.
Right. So, Jonathan, I'm going to come back to you in a minute because I do want to dig a little bit deeper into the AI legislation, because I think a lot of people who are on the call are going to be asking about, how dig did they deep? But I want to come to Sofia, and Sofia was a near not attending, but your visa came through in record time at the very end. So it was great to see you in person. And your session was about compliance in the Middle East. So for you attending as somebody from the MENA region, what stood out for you at this conference?
Well, thanks for that. First of all, it was an absolute pleasure to reconnect with everyone in person after all this time, after COVID, after visa situations. Finally making it in person was a true pleasure. And just to expand a little bit on the ChatGPT commentary here that was made by Jonathan and Mary, it's funny because I happened to be in Italy when ChatGPT was banned, and it was interesting to see the reaction of people locally. I don't know if many of you know, but within the span of 2 days, they came up with the Pizza GPT, which is the alternative to ChatGPT, and actually very popular. So so I mean, AI is definitely here to stay, and chatbots certainly are increasing in popularity. So on my end, in terms of the conference, what stood out for me the most, I think, is obviously, first of all, the number of attendees that have come to this conference and the variety of speakers that we've had from different parts of the world. So that was a nice change, I believe, from previous sessions, which were perhaps more US centric. So there was definitely a bit more variety on this conference. What stood out to me the most, I think, was the availability of investigation sessions, and I found that refreshing. As a previous ACFE member myself, I sort of wished there was more collaboration between the SCCE and the ACFE. I think we have seen it in the US, but we haven't seen it much in Europe. So the fact that there were sessions organized around investigations by ACFE members and previous investigators was very refreshing, and they were also very popular. They had a great attendance. So I mean, that's very important. You know, I've never been based in the US. I've always been based MENA side, and for us, you know, I started my career, as most of us in the region, as a legal person. You know, so as a legal person, your involvement with investigations is rather limited. I mean, you are called to you know, comment on certain things, but it's not a proper investigator role as we would see elsewhere. So I found that quite interesting and informative, you know, for people coming from that side of the world.
I think for me as well, Sophia, I think the amount of attendees from Saudi Arabia, from Dubai, from Morocco, from around the MENA region was both surprising and refreshing to see that this wasn't just a pan-European Amsterdam, Paris, Germany, and that's your lot. But it was a lot more inclusive in that way. What we'll do in about a couple of minutes' time, we'll talk about what we didn't see there. So that I'm going to tie that into the fact that we did see a lot of people in that region, and I want to get your thoughts on whether you think there was enough information and enough panels to kind of cover those attendees. You know, talking about the FCE, actually, there was a booth there at FCE, and actually, shameless plug, I'll be actually speaking at their conference in Dubai in May. So I'm looking forward to that. We had one quick question come in, which was kind of relevant to the panels we saw, and that was from compliance royalty, Adam Balfour, who's the Chief Compliance Officer for Bridgestone. And he asked about if there are any sessions on due diligence, third-party due diligence, and GDPR, including any tensions between the two. And I think Mary's kind of answered that in the chat, but maybe you want to, you know, enlarge on that for the session. And the second one was, what was Jonathan's best joke? He had an amazing joke in Phoenix CEI. I didn't hear any jokes of Jonathan. I think, you know, so I can't possibly comment on that. But so, Mary, do you want to enlarge on that point about what you saw for third-party due diligence and GDPR? Maybe Jonathan, I think you know a thing or two about GDPR. Maybe you can come in on that as well.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I did attend a session that was headed up due diligence, and I assumed it would have been everyday third-party due diligence, but it was on M&A due diligence, just the basics of, you know, what you do basically if your organization is merging with or acquiring another company. What are the steps to take to find out who you're popping into bed with? I do not recall any GDPR mention there. I thought it was a really great 101 session and didn't go into some of the intricacies of challenges that you have that can be very difficult to handle. So I'll phone a friend now, Jonathan Armstrong, to continue on with possible GDPR and third-party clashes.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't see a session on that. I mean, a shameless plug for somebody else's stuff. I wrote the bribery section in the SCCE manual, which we update every year, which for about the last, I'm guessing, 10 years, has had a bit of a session on the clashes between GDPR and anti-bribery due diligence. And yeah, I've written about it for 10 years. I don't think I've ever done a talk on it. And I think I've spotted it as an issue. It is something that you come across in practical terms. One of the real issues that you've had pre-invasion of Ukraine, but post as well, is of course a lot of Russian individuals trying to use GDPR rights to prevent due diligence, preventing them from getting involved in transactions. So you're definitely seeing more pressures than you used to with, as I say, high net worth individuals connected to nasty individuals trying to sort of cover up their past. It's definitely a live issue, but the reality is I don't think I can recall seeing a session at the conference that covered it.
Yeah, well, so what I do want to highlight is not so much although there were many takeaways from his session, I do want to highlight our other friend, Dr. Richard Lewis, who's the Chief Constable of Dyfed-Powys Police. He did a talk on who's Bud. He works for you, and you will need him. You need to find him before it's too late. Which it focused on an Air Force pilot who was left to break rules as he was perceived to be a hero, and the consequences of those broken rules became fatal. The entire talk for me was wonderful. It was inspirational. It was educational. But moreover, that was a great case study on lessons learned from what was a horrible Air Force tragedy not that long ago. And I think Mary and I were in the same session, sitting opposite each other, and from start to finish, fixated. I will, mention I do have some bias because obviously he is a Welshman and a member of the Welsh Constabulary, and did start his talk in Welsh and ended his talk in Welsh to highlight our lovely Welsh language. But that session for me really stood out as more of like a TED Talk keynote of the issues of rewarding or not punishing high performers in companies. And it was it told that great story.
Do you mind, Ty, if I jump onto that one, and a plug for Adam Joe Murphy and Rebecca Walker's new newsletter? I've written a piece for them on the Bud talk and how this interrelates with compliance initiatives. So one of the things that he talked about after this riveting and really compelling story was how he's implemented something within the police force of when there is a new sergeant, he writes them quite a heartfelt letter, and he not only congratulates them, but he asks them to take some time for contemplation, which he acknowledges is perhaps an unexpected request. And one of the things that he asks them to think about is the fact that they're going to need to have difficult and awkward conversations as leaders. And for us in compliance, sending a letter like this to new managers might be something that you consider doing in your organization, because as we know, it's not just here's a free pay increase and an increase in prestige with this swanky new title. You're getting paid more because you actually have a more difficult job to do, and that is corralling and inspiring other human beings. And so when we as compliance officers, I would say typically we try not to be the police. But after this talk, I'm going to ask you, maybe we do want to be more like the police. Maybe this idea of writing a letter to our new managers in our organizations and highlighting the very difficult conversations that they're about to have and how there are expectations of them that they do this is something that we want to be deliberate about. So check out that newsletter if you're not already subscribed, and thanks, Ty, for the opportunity to share this.
And where can people find this newsletter, Mary?
You can sign up for the newsletter. They're at about 3,000 subscribers right now. Adam, are you able to pop a link in the shared area, even if it's by way of a question, just so that everybody can see it? I'm not sure we've got the chat abled at this point.
When he does, I can then reshare that towards the end. Jonathan, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I missed that session, unfortunately, but I have had an investigation, a very serious investigation for a client where their compliance program had all sorts of failures, but we did find a letter from effectively the owner of the business or the founder of the business to people in the business, telling them not to chase revenue at the expense of ethics. And in some respects, it was a fairly terrible thing. There were typos in it. It was on really shoddy paper. It was not in keeping with the corporate image, etc., etc. But we really liked it because it was from the heart. And we presented it to the regulator and we said, to be honest, this isn't a corporate initiative, because any business of our client size would have polished it up, put it on nice paper. And so the recipients knew it was from the heart of the founder, because it wouldn't have passed muster any other way. And I think the regulator gave us much more credit for that than some sort of pre-produced glossy slick thing. So I think individualized letters have definitely got their place in a compliance program.
And, and I actually used a couple of his ideas, and I was very lucky enough to be able to promote some people in our company. And I did use that contemplation kind of part of the letters he sends out, because I think it brings a more personal and human part of that. This is not just a pay rise. This has ramifications and the unintended consequences of you not using this as an ability to be that leader and to kind of help identify organizational justice and ethical behavior is, I think, a miss. So I think, we've highlighted on what we saw and what we liked.
Can I chip in on a couple of panels?
Of course.
Yeah, just quickly from me, in no particular order. I mean, obviously, I like the panel I was on with Mary. I was sad I clashed with yours. I was sad I missed yours, Sofia. I like the Airbus panel. I like that sort of authentic, here's how a very bad thing happened, and here's what we learned along the way. Yvonne Hills from BW Offshore had a really good panel, I thought, in slavery, ethical labor audits. We're obviously talking a lot about that, but practically, how do you go and visit a site and check, the bathrooms, check the showers, check working conditions? I thought that was really good. I liked the Elena Durante, I think she's from ING. Again, a very practical session from an auditor of saying, you're making all these ESG commitments. How am I going to audit against them? How am I going to hold your hands to the fire if you're making these promises? And that, I think, fits in with what Mary and I were discussing about greenwashing and mint washing and green hushing, and people not being honest and open and transparent about the claims that they're making. And then finally, you've alluded to it briefly, and I would say this, wouldn't I? Because I think it was my idea that she came, but I really did like Jenny Radcliffe's talk at the end of day one, where she talked about, her life as a burglar and what that teaches us in terms of our resilience and compliance. So
and just to remind everyone, Jonathan, this was the social engineering kind of talk.
It was, yeah. So talking about how bad people are going to try and compromise your enterprise, and they're going to try and do that not just through brute force, but through social engineering, through cleverness, through using your LinkedIn profile, etc., etc.
Brilliant. So, Sophia, if I can come to you, I mean, your panel was on the Wednesday, and unfortunately, I did miss that, but it was about how to navigate a high-risk region. So you spoke about, the risks and challenges and the, more of the evolution of cultures of compliance in the Middle East. Now, we're seeing it's more of a vibrant compliance and innovative country now. And some of the lessons learned from some recent enforcement actions from your legal background. What did you not see? What did you go there and come away with saying, I wished I'd seen this, or I wish I'd heard that?
Definitely more due diligence talks. I think we've briefly covered it earlier, but I think we could have used definitely more due diligence topics to further enhance the discussion. Certainly, the Middle East region, as the title of my session indicates, is a very high risk region. So it's either high risk or very high risk. It's not anywhere in, it's not anywhere lower than that, unfortunately. So it depends where you're based or where you're operating. And if you add the North Africa to that, it makes it even more complicated. So obviously, I'm not going to summarize a 1 hour session into this small discussion, but indeed, due diligence remains one of our challenge within the region, simply because we are confronted to a host variety of risks. And the risks of the regions are very particular. So obviously, as you know, it's a very high risk region for money laundering and terrorist financing. There's a profusion of terrorist groups. We have seen an increase of enforcement actions which are related to either bribery to terrorist groups or doing business with terrorist groups in general. So certainly there's an interest from regulators in the region on that front. And if you don't come from the financial sectors, you're not necessarily well versed into, PEP screening and sanction screening and this sort of things. Although now more and more multinationals are, obviously getting, are speeding up on that front. But this certainly wasn't the case a couple of years ago, even. So there's definitely more development on this front. What's interesting also is from a sanction and export control perspective, obviously the Middle East is one of the most sanctioned regions to begin with Mohammed being probably the most sanctioned and designated name in the entire sanction space. So that's just a reality. It would have been nice to have sessions perhaps covering, the subtleties of, what do you do when you're confronted with fuzzy names or different spellings of the word Mohammed, things of the sort, because that certainly has been the subject of enforcement actions as well. Corruption is still a very widespread problem in the region. That hasn't changed, despite what some countries would like to say and portray. Corruption is still a very rampant problem. Varying degrees of corruption, and I think a lot of companies operating in the region can appreciate the difficulties of doing business. I mean, if my story with the visa situation can be an example, that just shows you like facilitation payments are a way of life in certain countries, and they certainly are in Morocco, for example. With that said, there needs to be more from the SCCE on the due diligence front, explaining, the importance of due diligence. I know it sounds kind of basic for people from other regions, but for my region, that's sorely needed, and we're still catching up to speed, with what the rest of the world is doing. So. With the passing of new AML laws and enforcement even locally, we are starting to see, for example, more enforcement in Morocco through the green number. There's a national green number that people can call to, to basically raise a complaint about corruption. So, with these type of enforcement actions, there certainly is interest in corruption risk mitigation strategies, and certainly due diligence. The same could be said, obviously, about human rights. The region has been heavily criticized for its human rights conditions, and notably its freedom of speech and perhaps even labor, law mistreatment of migrant workers and whatnot. So, with all that, we do need a little bit of support from the rest of the world in helping us put our houses in order, to obviously become less risky, hopefully.
Well, I'm hoping if anyone's hearing this and wants to kind of put a panel suggestion into next year's SCCE ECEI in Europe, then one of those topics would be a good fit. What about you, Mary? When you walked away from the conference, what did you think was going to be talked about that wasn't, and what do you think that your miss was?
Sure. So I'll hit on a couple of agreements with Sofia for a moment. Like Sofia, I've also been based out in the Middle East. And I do not think that you can appreciate, without being based out there and having a large, business operating there, the frequency with which your colleagues and yourself, as did happen to me, get asked for facilitation payments. It is something that you really need to be combating on the regular. It's to the point where I had to tell my engineers, please stop wearing our company polo shirts. They know to look for you now. Just just do not wear anything with a company name on it to try and mitigate our risk there. So totally agree with Sofia's point. Due diligence the same. I have not managed the due diligence area of a compliance program for 10 years now. I was really looking forward to brushing up my skills. One thing that I learned recently outside of the conference that would have been nice to see in terms of like how things are changing, what the trends are across the board, that I learned from a friend who's in the due diligence space as a vendor. I used to work for a due diligence vendor myself many years ago. And he was saying that nowadays, just about no one conducts reference checks. And the last time I was doing it, they were still pretty popular. So something like that, which really gets to what is modern day due diligence looking like? What are some, what are people doing and why? Why have we moved away from things like reference checks? Well, there's many reasons for that, but you know what I mean, to cover that kind of thing. For me, in terms of what I had expected to be covered, and despite not being an American, I feel like I'm sort of shunted into an American lens sometimes just by virtue of being surrounded by so many American practitioners. But one of the big things here, the chatter has been on ephemeral messaging platforms and the US government guidance. And I would have liked to have seen, particularly in relation to data privacy, like how are you going to reconcile the expectations of the US government versus data privacy regimes in countries, and I'm not just talking about Europe, Asia has some pretty strict data privacy acts in place these days. And I'll juxtapose this with, because I'm crazy, 2 nanoseconds after I got back from Amsterdam, I then flew to California to shake up my body clock once more and attend the Consero Chief Compliance Officer Forum. And that was quite a big issue that Team America was grappling with in terms of being in the process of drafting their policies and thinking about, well, how are we even going to practically enforce this, which I think is the obvious question. And again, in light of data privacy, how are we even going to know people are using their platforms? What if it's a BYOD or otherwise a personal device that I don't even know exists, let alone have access to? So that's a type of thing. And, maybe what falls into this, of course, is that speakers need to submit their proposals almost a year in advance sometimes at the conference, and this DOJ guidance is only a month or 2 old, so perhaps it's unsurprising, but I was a little bit surprised that it wasn't covered a little bit more, just even more on the flyer, and people preparing in the last few weeks up to the conference. So I would have liked to have heard, and maybe for next year, how are organizations figuring out how to monitor employee messaging platforms or non-official platforms, especially in light of data privacy regulations.
Maybe for next year, especially with some of this just-in-time information, maybe a just-in roundtable where
Ooh, I like it.
Where just maybe carve out an hour of maybe the first or second day where people can come and join a kind of more engaging discussion about what's just hit the pipe in the last 2 to 3 months that wouldn't have been happening. Are you
suggesting we propose this, Ty?
I am in the midst of writing that proposal as we speak.
Fabulous.
But before we do that, Jonathan, what were your takeaways from I wished I could have heard that?
Yeah, I agree with all of those things. I think just without making Mary's problem worse, I think the other area where we've particularly got a technology challenge is those organizations who were dumb enough to record every Zoom and Teams chat during the pandemic and not delete that data. And I know that sounds a dumb thing to do, but I know that a lot of organizations have done it. And there are hundreds of hours worth of material that you might not have the appetite to watch, but a regulator does. So for many organizations, there's a challenge of them creating way too much data and that coming back to haunt them. But in the interests of time, the only other thing I missed, I guess, was compliance karaoke. We've never had a karaoke session. I think it's a great way of learning. I mean, I've just thought up, we can't go on together without appropriate due diligence. I mean, that's bound to be a hit, isn't it?
Yeah, I think your definition of a hit may be different to our definition of hit. But I could,
there have been worse in Eurovision, Ty.
but I could shamelessly plug that we could tie in a karaoke compliance session to a dueling piano bar
We could.
karaoke session, which you will find if you attend the SCCE Compliance Ethics Conference in Chicago in October, where we will be hosting a dueling piano bar event on the Monday night at Howl at the Moon.
Fabulous.
So one question that came in actually from one of my colleagues, Damien DeBarra, who heads up our learning and curriculum design, asked about the sessions about crypto and its implications in compliance. I'm not sure if you saw any, I certainly didn't. Do you see that as a session coming up in the next issue, or do you think it's too narrowly focused into fintech?
I mean, from a personal point of view, I think I don't want to be completely broad brush, but there are loads of compliance issues around crypto, and it's hard to see a way in which compliance officers can recommend getting involved in crypto. You know, you can look at all of the many scandals we've had, you know, just I don't know, listen to the BBC's excellent podcast on OneCoin, for example, where relatively sensible businesses, you know, somebody with, I believe, a McKinsey background has pitched, you know, crypto scams effectively to individuals and to businesses. I think that's a really challenging area for any organization to get involved with. I know at least one SCCE member has left to join a cryptocurrency, and without telling tales out of school, I think that person couldn't get the compliance vibes well enough to stay there beyond a couple of weeks. So I think it'd be an interesting panel. From my contribution, it would be short, and it would say, you know, don't jump into rivers with alligators.
Okay. So we talked about what we saw, what we enjoyed. We talked about what we thought should have been there, but wasn't, and could have been timing, as Mary said. Some of these, you know, panel suggestions are put in a year in advance. And, you know, looking at next year's SCCE ECEI, and we'll be in Amsterdam again. I think it's around the same time. You know, Mary and Sofia, what do you want to see at the conference next year? I think, you know, we talked about what you didn't see, Sofia, so I'm assuming you'd like more of that. But I think, you know, as you saw so many participants coming in from the Middle East, I think that would be a bit of a miss.
Well, I certainly hope that we continue having more participants from the Middle East joining these sessions. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a miss. You know, there were certainly lots of very interesting topics, and you know, a lot of controversial ones as well. You know, it was interesting to see, you know, Ericsson's sessions, for example, or Airbus, which generated a lot of commentary. I'm talking about the second session. There was a repeat of that session. But I mean, what I would like to see next year certainly is, you know, more focus on the rest of the regions, simply because compliance officers that are headquarter focused, we shall say, you know, that have only headquarter teams, tend to miss the action, what really happens on the ground. And I mean, what I would like to see is really more voices coming from other parts of the world contributing to the discussion, and bringing in their scenarios, and bringing in their typologies, and bringing in their risk profiles, and talking about their challenges in their region. I think that would be an interesting addition.
What about you, Mary?
Yeah, I agree with that. Half Chinese person speaking here have spent over 5 years of my career working out in Asia Pacific. There are some nuances that every region has that, you know, can really be missed if you are not on the ground or otherwise assimilating yourself in that culture. And I think we can all benefit, especially those of us in multinational programs. But I've certainly heard of people who are just in domestic programs, but they're fascinated by some of the unique cultural differences that can really play a part in informing the success of your compliance program. So I'd love to see a little bit more from Team Asia about some of the challenges there. And harking back to an earlier part of our conversation, I remember one of the most jolting issues for due diligence came at the time of the GSK case, when Peter Humphreys and his wife, who were due diligence investigators, were arrested and spent time in prison for doing due diligence on an individual. And so that obviously had data privacy concerns there. And so that sort of brought about, at the time at least, the question of, oh my goodness, should we stop doing due diligence completely in China? And so I'd love to see, we did see some Latin America presence, of course, Sofia in her session. Love to see a little bit more from the Asia Pacific side to be a little bit more full circle in that respect and give Team Asia some presence on the global stage. I think that's what I'd love to see. And then also, not topic wise, but I think, and this really boils down to the speakers, more precision when it comes to defining what the session is going to be about. So people don't want to be misled and go to a session that is actually not on what it sounds like it's going to be about. Similarly, what the SCCE have introduced, at least for the main conference. I'm going to the HCCA in April next month, and I cannot recall if the healthcare one does this, but almost a leveling, so that you know if you're signing up for a beginner, intermediate, or advanced course. And that, I think, can really help with the satisfaction of the attendees when they're choosing to attend sessions where they're going to learn something and not spend their time and own money or employers' money, as the case may be, hearing stuff that they already know about. So that's what I'd ask to be considered for the future, if anyone with those decision-making powers are in fact listening.
I think talking about granularity, about session description, and bringing in the fact of bringing in Europe and specific regional regulations, I thought Maria from Square and Cecilia from Compliance for Good and Susan DeBecker from Microsoft, their KPI measuring session, which was replicated twice,
that was good.
Was great because there was a lot of information there. There was a lot of granularity, and I think there were a lot of aha moments when questions were asked of the audience. I think what I did see this year, which was good, was some more audience participation engagement. I'd like to see a bit more of that to kind of gauge the level of people who are in the room. And to your point, Mary, yes, we do see intermediate, beginner, advanced. And I think Maria, Cecilia, and Susan's session was an advanced session. But I think having that kind of digital focus group kind of data gathering is super important, especially when you're looking at the next year's sessions. That's one thing I took away from that. I think the Airbus, I think that was repeated twice. Some of these very specific panels, I think it is valuable to have repetitions of those, not just for the speaker, so they can say, well, actually, I wish I'd done that thing and now I can do it again. But also the fact that there's a lot of information, and I did see the same people in the session again and again, so they wanted to get more of that information, because it's all about, for me, it's all about what can I take away from that panel that I can go back to my company or my industry and help with. One session I did like, unfortunately, it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and I know the trials and tribulations of having an 8 a.m. session, which I did in Phoenix, was Gonzalo Guzman, who's the Chief Integrity Officer for Unilever, talking about compliance advocacy, about, although it was mostly about compliance advocacy externally, he did bring that conversation at the end into how can we internally be advocates for our own compliance program. I know we could talk about compliance ambassadors and ethics ambassadors, but I think that was important as well. So Jonathan, finally, for you, takeaways from this to go into next year's, what are you going to be looking for?
I mean, I echo your sentiments at the start. I think some of the best things for me were actually not the formal sessions. It was meetings in, yes, bars, corridors, sandwich shops, whatever that might be. I'm not just saying it because it's you. I enjoyed our chat on Sunday night, you, me, and Amy, and I thought I learned a lot more about some of the people that we've talked to for 3, 4, 5 years, and I think people were much more open. I think certainly on our panel, Mary, I think people were contributing more than they did pre-pandemic. So I'd certainly be, I thought that was a great feature of the conference, that people were genuinely regarding each other as peers and as friends, I think, in many cases. So I thought that was really heartwarming. What will I be looking for next year? And one of the things that's going through my mind at the moment is the way in which the financial services sector are looking at operational resilience and how that sort of compliance, but more so, and what is the compliance officer's role in operational resilience. And the more I think about it, the more I think the compliance officer should be front and center there. So that'll be about horizon scanning, looking at what your threats are going to be. It'll be about quick fixes for responding to threats, knowing that not all of them are predictable. So Mary, you and I and Kevin tried to do a session on this last year, which was virtual. I think it works better as a face-to-face session. And it'll be about, how do you wrap up from events and how do you learn from them? And some of the panels that I mentioned had that type of learning. It's always easier to learn from someone else's mistakes than your own. But that whole end-to-end operational resilience, how do we make our organizations more robust? Compliance is part of it, but it's the heart of some of the other bits as well. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to seeing next year.
And Sophia, if hopefully we get to see you next year as well, is there something specific you'd be looking for? Something that would stand out in the conference session that you didn't see this year? We did talk about due diligence, but is there something specific that you think, if I go, this is my one thing I can't miss?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at it holistically, I mean, we have to realize that compliance is becoming one big thing. Okay, we have AML compliance, we have sanction compliance, we have export control compliance, we have corruption compliance. What I would like to see is a more cohesive discussion around these topics and how to best manage them when you have limited resources. Perhaps, ideas for small compliance budgets or small to medium companies, things of the sort. And then likewise, with now the sanctions being the new FCPA, perhaps a small segment on that front, since it is becoming a topic of enforcement, not only in the US, but in Europe. So perhaps a bit more focus on that. I realize it is not a sanction specific conference, and there are other venues for that, but certainly to just give people an appreciation that, it is becoming a thing for compliance programs as a whole.
The one thing I will give a plug for is Adam Turtletop does a great job in his speed networking, which is something I think is overlooked. I joined it this year. I joined it in Chicago, and Adam is a great kind of ringmaster for this, and it really helps people get to know each other, especially those compliance professionals who are first timers in a conference. It helps get that familiarity. So I hope that's going to come back. So I'm looking at the time. We don't have any questions in the chat. So we've got about 90 seconds, which is a perfect 30 seconds each, for you to shamelessly plug what you have coming up next, what's going to happen in the next 6 months. So let's start with you, Jonathan, because I know you always go over. So it'll give hopefully more time to Mary and Sophia. So what's next for you?
We've got a couple of new films coming out. I'm sure there's lots of things. Just monitor my socials and I'm sure you'll find out.
Wow.
And we've got the shop opening. For those of you who know the shop story, come and shop in the southwest of England. Proper community store, putting the heart back into the community of Trevetherick. So
Mary, what have you got coming up? I'm assuming the next Great Women in Compliance episode is imminent.
It's tomorrow, coming back from our 2-week break, and we also have a very big announcement about the future of the podcast. So a little teaser there. If you're going to the HCCA conference, that's the healthcare version of this conference in Anaheim next month, please come and say hi. Also, Women in Compliance Summit in June, Lisa Fine and I are speaking about networking. We'd love to meet you. Thank you for the opportunity, Ty.
Great. And Sophia?
I'm just going to keep on being vocal. So you can see me on the Compliance Lady and on LinkedIn and, and catch up the vocality.
Well, and please do keep being vocal. I think, you know, the a quiet Sophia is not our favorite Sophia. So unfortunately, we are at time. Thank you, Jonathan from Cordery, Mary and Sophia, for your time, your insights, your thoughts about what we saw in Amsterdam this year. And hopefully we can replicate this next year. My name is Ty Francis. I'm at LRN and we've been your hosts for today. And we hope to see you in a not too distant future.
Thanks all.